Picture this. It's the fall of 1983, and the world is teetering on the absolute edge of a nuclear holocaust. For decades, the full story was locked away, top secret. But now, thanks to a whole bunch of declassified documents, we can finally piece together the terrifying story of how misunderstandings, paranoia, and a secret Soviet Doomsday computer almost ended, well, everything. And, you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to what Mikhail Gorbachev himself had to say about it in 1986. Now, this wasn't some historian looking back with 2020 hindsight. This was a man right at the heart of the Soviet system, and he saw the world as a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And that right there, that is the central mystery of this entire story. How on earth could the United States and the Soviet Union come so incredibly close to global annihilation while one of the superpowers was almost completely oblivious to the danger? All right, let's dive in. To really get our heads around this incredible intelligence failure, we first have to see the world the way Washington saw it back in the early 1980s. And let me tell you, it was a time of incredibly high tension and really deep mistrust. Yeah, that whole era of détente, of trying to ease tensions, that was completely over. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan back in '79 just shattered what little goodwill was left. Then, in 1981, you get a new US administration that starts this massive military buildup and adopts a much, much tougher tone. By '83, after the Soviets shoot down a Korean passenger jet and the US invades Grenada, the relationship was at absolute rock bottom. The whole world was on a knife's edge. So you can feel the tension, right? It's through the roof. And at the same time, US intelligence starts picking up these really bizarre and frankly alarming signals coming out of the Soviet Union. The big question was, what did it all mean? And when you put it all together, the pattern was deeply worrying. The Soviets were running these huge civil defense drills. They pulled their military off the annual harvest. And you have to understand, that hadn't happened since just before the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia. Their special forces were deploying in weird ways, their nuclear subs were on higher alert, and most concerning of all, their intelligence agencies, the KGB and the GRU, were given their highest possible priority. Find any scrap of evidence that the US was preparing a surprise nuclear attack. So the US sees all of this incredibly alarming activity, and their conclusion? It's all fake. A political bluff. Just a big propaganda show. A 1984 intelligence estimate actually said, in no uncertain terms, that the Soviets did not perceive a genuine danger. So the crucial point here is, the official American position was that this was all just political theater. Okay, so let's zoom in on a specific event and see how this whole buildup of misperception played out in a real-world military exercise that happened in November of 1983. This thing was called Able Archer 83. And you've got to understand, on paper, this was supposed to be completely routine. It was an annual event, it was announced ahead of time, and it was a command post exercise, which basically means it was a bunch of officers in bunkers practicing procedures, not troops moving around in the field. But the Soviet reaction, it was anything but routine. They put their air forces in East Germany and Poland on high alert, they flew way more spy planes than usual, and they sent out these urgent messages to their agents to look for any tiny sign that this exercise was actually a cover for a real attack. For a standard NATO drill, this kind of response was completely, totally unprecedented. And that's the wild part, the total disconnect. On the ground, the US commanders had no idea anything was wrong. To them, it was just another day of drills. So, if it was just an exercise, why was Moscow acting like World War III was about to kick off? To answer that, we have to go behind the Iron Curtain. This is where the whole story flips on its head. The reason the official US take was so dangerously wrong is because it missed the single most important piece of the puzzle. The Kremlin wasn't bluffing. They were genuinely terrified. See, this is the key. The US looked across the globe and saw this co-equal superpower with a huge, secure nuclear arsenal. But when the Soviets looked in the mirror, they saw something completely different. They saw profound vulnerability. They knew their command and control was brittle, that their bombers were sitting ducks on airfields, and that most of their nuclear subs were just sitting in port. They were terrified that a surprise bolt from the blue attack could just wipe them out. And this is the detail that tipped that fear over into full-blown paranoia. The deployment of new American Pershing II missiles in West Germany. Now, from the Soviet perspective, these weren't defensive weapons. With a flight time of only about 8 minutes to Moscow, they were seen as a decapitation weapon, one designed to kill the entire Soviet leadership before they could even think about retaliating.
Okay, now here's where the story takes a turn that sounds like it's straight out of a Cold War movie. That deep-seated fear was then fed into and amplified by a top-secret KGB computer program.
It was called VRYAN. That's VRYAN, which is an acronym for Sudden Nuclear Missile Attack. And it was this massive computer model weighing something like 40,000 different military, economic, and political factors. Its whole purpose was to calculate the balance of power and predict the exact moment the US might feel strong enough to risk a first strike. Think of it like a digital doomsday oracle. So the people who built this thing, they decided on a safe number, 60%. If Soviet power was at 60% of America's, they figured, hey, we're safe. That was their baseline. That was the number that meant mutual deterrence was working. But then, by 1984, VRAN starts spitting out some seriously bad news. It calculated that Soviet power had plummeted to just 45%. So now the leadership wasn't just feeling paranoid. Their own top-secret computer was telling them, with hard numbers, that they were squarely in the danger zone. And then there was the red line, the real point of no return, 40%. If the calculation ever dropped below that threshold, the KGB and the military believed the security of the Soviet Union could no longer be guaranteed. And the terrifying implication of that was that a preemptive Soviet strike might be justified as their only chance of survival. And this table, it just lays it all out so clearly. You had two completely different, totally dangerous interpretations of the exact same events. The US saw the Pershing II missiles as just countering Soviet missiles. The Soviets saw a first strike weapon. The US saw tough rhetoric as political posturing. The Soviets heard genuine hostile intent. An able archer, to the US, it was routine training. To the Soviets, it looked like the perfect cover for a surprise attack. So how did they figure all this out after the fact? I mean, after the world narrowly avoided ending itself. Well, a post-mortem report from the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, or PFIAB, it identified the core failure and offered a really crucial lesson. The core mistake, the fundamental flaw in their thinking, was this classic intelligence trap called mirror imaging. Basically, US analysts assumed the Soviets saw the world the exact same way they did. The thinking was something like, look, we know we have no intention of starting a nuclear war, so they must know that too. They completely failed to grasp that from Moscow's perspective, a perspective shaped by history, their own vulnerability, and that VRAN computer, the threat felt terrifyingly real. So the report lays out this new way of thinking. It's called comparative risk assessment, and it's actually pretty straightforward. Instead of just picking one conclusion like, it's all propaganda, you have to lay out all the possibilities. Then, and this is the key step, you have to assess the risk of being wrong about each one. And what they found was that the risk of wrongly dismissing genuine Soviet fear was, existential, the end of the world. The risk of wrongly believing their propaganda, much, much smaller. So what's the big takeaway here? The 1983 war scare is this terrifying lesson in just how catastrophic it can be when you misread an adversary's genuine fear as just aggression. It shows us that failing to see the world from another's perspective isn't just a simple mistake, it can be world-ending. And that, of course, raises a pretty crucial question for us today. Are we still listening?